change of play. We'll do an intro at 15:15, then we're going to have a beer break, and then we're going to do the main bit at 50:30, right? So you don't have to stand around for too long. So 8 minutes, and we'll, or a few minutes. Right then, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to kick off, metaphorically speaking. I'm Glyn Watkins, Dave Pendleton, Steve Jenkins. Me and Dave have did this kind of a show at the Cathedral about 4 or 5 years ago. Dave organises trips to the gravestones or the memorials of the Bradford City players. Steve got in touch with Dave, and we decided to do this as a joint effort in memory of those that fell. We're talking about Bradford City's greatest time. We're talking about the time when it had been an industrial powerhouse, it had become semi-civilised and had got a football team. So Bradford City, Manningham Rugby League Club, a Northern Union turned into rugby league after Manningham changed their mind. 1903, the club started, got in lots and lots of Scots and Irishmen, and Edwardian Bradford was thriving. Arguably, it's the best time Bradford ever had, both for the football and for the industry. There's JB Priestley. We'll be passing his statue, and I'll be reading a little bit out from him at the end of this session. Bradford had their record crowd. I don't think that is the record crowd, but that's what the Cop used to look like in the olden days. Before
that's not Bradford, that's City.
Sorry, Bradford City, yeah, it's Bradford Park Avenue. And I'm glad you said that, because Dave will be mentioning the 2 Bradford Park Avenue players that were killed in the war as well at the cenotaph. So that's Bradford City, and this is Bradford's greatest ever moment. 1911, winning the FA Cup, and Dave's going to tell you who in that picture didn't survive the First World War. 2 last things before Dave and then Steve talk about the players. We are making a collection. There is a pint pot with a green bag inside, and the collection, I've actually decided this morning after talking to Steve, a little bit of the collection, or at least some of the collection, will be going to the upkeep of the Orient Memorial. Most of it will be going to the TNA's PALS Battalion Memorial. Is that the right phrase for it?
Bradford PALS.
Bradford PALS. My mate Joe's filming it. Hopefully it will be on YouTube with a link to the Just Give sign. So if you want to put some money in, I'm going to take a tiny amount of expenses out, but it's not going to be much. And apart from that, the rest of it will, as I say, be going to help keep the memorials alive that remember the time that has long gone. Right then, so I'll pass you over to Dave.
As you know, I'll talk about the players themselves, but since 2011, which was the 100th anniversary of the FA Cup win, and 2 of those players who played in the final were killed in the First World War, we've been taking trips out to France and Belgium. There's quite a few familiar faces here from those trips, and it's become almost an annual pilgrimage, if that's the right word to use. And I was made aware of Steve doing the similar thing with the Orient, so we thought this is a fantastic event to get both clubs together to talk about our joint losses, our shared histories, if you like. And I think when you go out to France and Belgium, you see these beautifully kept, wonderfully tended. It's a real tip of the hat to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Those cemeteries are stunning, and there's more and more memorials appearing every year. And I imagine over the next 3 or 4 years, there's even more going to appear. And that's another possibility that our little group has done now, that there might be a Bradford Pals Memorial appearing in Busla-Artois, which is a little village where the Pals were billeted just before the Battle of the Somme. The other big news to tell you is that we've got the clubs back in to try and look at a feasibility to erect a statue of Jimmy Spears in Bradford. It's going to cost an absolute fortune. We're in talks with Westfield, but I don't really think we'll get very far with that. The idea of that being is when we walk down later, we'll see the Midland Hotel where the club took the FA Cup. The FA Cup was designed in Bradford, almost on the site of where the new Westfield shopping centre is being built now, opposite the Midland Hotel, which is where Spears appeared on the balcony to show the FA Cup to 100,000 people. So you've got all those events wrapped up together. We've got the FA Cup being designed, the FA Cup being won, the biggest celebration in Bradford's history, and then of course the death of Jimmy Spears in the war. So we're hoping to bring that all together and perhaps get something done for Jimmy. If not, Mark Lone has said to us that Valley Parade is not a problem. He'll find us a bit of land and it will be done. It's just a matter of raising £100,000. But there we go. Anyway, so that's my little part. Oh, sorry, just one more thing to say. I mentioned the trips. We're going back in April. It's the first of the player centenaries of their deaths. Gerald Kirk's the first one in April 1915. That's a terrible ringtone over that. Anyway, so we're going back in April 1915. Sorry, 2015 even. We can't travel back in time. So you're welcome to talk to me about the trip. It'll cost about £300. We're going from a Tuesday till a Friday. It's the 21st to the 24th of April. We get back just in time for the Barnsley last home game of the season, and we're going to be at Gerald's graveside exactly 100 years to the day from his death. So I think that'll be a great trip. All you lads who go, it's a very sociable trip. It's not a sombre trip trooping around the gravestones. So please have words with me afterwards. But anyway, enough from me. Steve.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, David, very much for the very warm and kind invitation to invite me up to take part in this combined talk, and to meet Glyn as well, who's very much involved with the organisation and the production here today. That's my little message going there. So, anyway, it's just to say, get on with it. So, real football clubs, that's what we're talking about here. It's none of your Premier League rubbish here we're talking about. Okay, this is all about the communities. David's already spoken about Bradford. Sorry, Glyn's spoken about Bradford, and I know David has as well. I'm talking about East London, Clapton Orient, as the club was called at the time. Two things have left Leyton Orient the size it is today. One of which, obviously, is the Great War, and the other thing is, obviously, Arsenal moving from Woolwich into North London. A year before the outbreak of the Great War, both Orient and Spurs rigorously objected to that move, but it still took place. There was rumours of brown envelopes behind radiators at railway stations and things like that. Okay, so that happened in 1913, and the Great War. The chairman of the Orient, Captain Henry Wells Holland, he was a territorial army man by background, and he always had his intention to get his Orient site to join up independently. But a special meeting was formed at Fulham Town Hall on the 15th of December 1914 by the FA and the War Office to raise the 17th Middlesex, the footballers battalion, a Powers battalion. And I've got to tell you obviously what a Powers battalion is. There were so many of them, particularly from the north of England at the start of the Great War, to serve king and country. That was in a reaction to the way public opinion had been damaged and really affected by the way that professional football still continued, despite the fact that war had broken out in August of 1914. Cricket was fortunate that the season was coming to an end anyway, and rugby, because it was mainly an amateur game and from a lot of schools and colleges, that stopped. I suppose I would say because they're gentlemen, I don't know. There was definitely a class structure in place, even in those days, between people that supported and played rugby and those that went to watch football. When the war broke out, the authorities still thought it was a great idea to go and watch football, because it's a way of relieving all the stresses and tension of during the week, both at work and obviously over in the front line. But when the casualty figures started coming through, the players, instead of being cheered, they were jeered. Things were being thrown at them, abused, and then the worst thing that happened was people stopped going through the turnstiles. Not only then did the clubs react, and then got the FA involved. So, that's the background. The whole of the Orient side, 41 of them, players, staff and supporters, joined up into the 17th Middlesex. The Orient captain being the very first player to join up into that battalion, Fred Spider Parker. And so we're going to the players independently in due course. What I will say to you, as David was saying, that obviously trips to the Somme have taken place. We've undertaken 4 over the past 8 years. 8 years now. We went over this year. We took over with us the families of the 3 lads that were killed on the Somme, for them to meet up for the first time since 1916 to stand by their ancestors' graves. And it's making the hairs of my neck stand up now, even as I'm talking to you about that. And we've already got our dates booked for 2016 of what I would really like. It'd be fantastic if football clubs can meet us over there in July 2016 to share and commemorate the service and sacrifice made by all the players in the Great War. Thank you very much.
Without further ado, Dave Pendleton on the first of the Bradford City players. Yeah. There we go.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. Thank you. 9 City players died, or players who had either played for us or some had moved on, a few had retired, and 3 were still at the club. So there's 9 in total. And they're an interesting gang because they cover quite a wide range of footballers and what happened. They're not all superstars. Some are reserves, some are middling players, some are journeymen. And one of them, James Comrie, was a journeyman footballer. If you want to think that people flitting between clubs for signing on fees is a modern thing, we'll think again. James had been all over the place. He played for Reading, he played for Glossop North End, where we were the first division club, believe it or not. Then they'd been bankrolled at the top league by the Hill Wood family, who later owned Arsenal. When they made the money, they cleared off to London and pretended they weren't from the north anymore. So we bought James as a replacement for a fella you're going to see in a bit, Gerald Kirk. When we got promoted to the first division in 1908, obviously we had to buy new players in to keep at that level. We all know what it's like when you get in the top flight and overspend. Well, they did it back then, but they were a bit more successful, thankfully. So James was only with us for a few years. He retired, disappeared off to Lincoln, ended up serving in the Northumberland Regiment and was killed on the outside Ypres. We don't know how he died, he's disappeared, so his name's amongst the 56,000 names of the men in Gate. For those who've been to Ypres, it's where the Belgian Fire Brigade play the last post every night. So, talking about players that might be related to the modern age, Jimmy Conlin, probably one of our greatest ever players, our first England international. The press today would love him. He was the second player in the world to be sold for £1,000, which was an absolute load of money back then. He also was our first player to be sent off. He caused a riot against Manchester United in 1909 when he was rugby tackled by the Manchester United fullback Bob Bomford, who was a big strapping lad. Jimmy was about the size of me but thinner. And he kept going past him, so that Bob decided he'd rugby tackle him. The referee did nothing about it. He sawed him down a few times, so the crowd took matters into their own hands afterwards. Big Bob came out to see what the crowd was going to do. The first thing that happened, he got punched in the head and hit by a brick and got chased up to the Bellevue, and the ground got closer a month. So again, football hooliganism, and Jimmy's career collapsed into drink, unfortunately. He ended up back in Scotland, because although he was English, he was an English international winger, our first international, as I said. His family had moved to Coatbridge because they were steel workers, so he ended up back in Glasgow. His career collapsed amongst drink allegations, but when war came along, he joined the Highland Light Infantry, the Glasgow Tramways Battalion, and was killed out at Newport on the coast at Belgium. Another fella who's no known grave. There's quite a lot of these, it goes on all the time. And the Newport Memorial at the coast has got bullet holes in it from the Second World War. So nothing much changes. And as I said, there are a mixture of these boys. George Draycott, a fella who never broke through with the first team. The war got in the way. He was a reserve, came up from Derbyshire from a mining family. I've seen his birth certificate. His mother signed it with a cross. So perhaps football was a way out of poverty, a way out of the mines. Unfortunately, along came the war. Now, George was killed very late in the war. He was killed in the offensive, the British and, well, the Allied offensive that pushed the Germans back towards the Hindenburg line. He was killed at the Battle of Ypres. And that was the first grave we visited in France. And it's a wonderful little place, if you can call a cemetery a wonderful place. It's a tiny little cemetery on the top of a hill with one single tree, and you have to walk up this long scruffy pathway to get to it because there's no road access, and it affected all of us quite deeply. It was a beautiful, beautiful place. So that's George's fate. Another reserve, Ernest Goodwin, a fairly more local to Valley Parade is impossible to find. Many of you know South Parade that ran round the back of the old main stand. Remember the Grand Prix fire? Nowadays it's underneath the new main stand. His house was there on South Parade, so he was right next door to the ground. He was a territorial, so he was based at the Bellevue barracks just up the road. So he'd have walked up the road to join his unit, and off to France they went. He was wounded with shrapnel on the Somme. He got all the way back to a tap, which is an enormous 11,000 grave cemetery on the coast. When you got that far, you usually survived and got home, unfortunately. Ernest didn't. Gerald Kirk, I spoke about James Comrie at the start. Gerald was replaced by James Comrie when we got promoted to the First Division. Gerald's the first player to die, actually. This is a fellow whose grave we'll be at in 2015. Ingleton man, almost a player out of his time because he was an amateur. So he was a gentleman amateur player. His family owned loads of land up at Ingleton in North Yorkshire. So he was a very well-to-do, privately educated fella. But he joined the Royal Lancaster Regiment as a private and worked his way up to a lieutenant. He was killed at he was wounded at Saint-Julien. Some of you'll know that's the first place that the Germans ever used gas in the history of warfare, and it scattered the French Zouaves, the colonial troops, and into a counter-attack was thrown the Canadians and Gerald's battalion. He led his battalion, they were shot at from three sides, he was mown down by a machine gun, badly wounded, taken back to Popperinge, and he died there the following day, and will be at his graveside in April, exactly 100 years along. Very famous player, Evelyn Lintop, England international midfield player. He was a teacher as well, so he decided to keep teaching despite the fact he was an international footballer. He decided to keep teaching. He was at a school at Dudley Hill, it's still there near the Salamander Brewery. Highly educated man. His brother was preceptor, which was a Bradford Daily Argus' football reporter. He was the second ever head of the professional, what we know today as the PFA, the Footballers' Union, but it was the Players' Union back then. So obviously a really intelligent bloke. He was fed up, the Bradford Pals filled up really quickly, and he was fed up away, so he went across to Leeds and joined the Leeds Pals. He was an officer, and he led his men on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, and unfortunately, as happened to too many men that day, he was hit once, apparently he stumbled back to his feet, he was hit again, and he pulled his gun out and waved his men on. He was hit a third time, and that was him done. His body was never found. So his name's on the 72,000 name Teepval Memorial on the Somme, and anybody who's been there, that is an astonishing place to go, because you will find, if you look at hard enough, you'll find your own name, because there's so many names, the nameless names as Sassoon called it. Harry Potter, a lot of people giggle when they hear his name, unfortunately. He was another Bradford City reserve, a local lad, a Girlington lad. He never broke through with the first team. The war came along, he joined the West Yorkshire Regiment, and then what happens is people get transferred left, right and centre, and he ends up in the Lincolnshires, simply because they took massive casualties. So he was put in with the Lincolnshires. The German Spring Offensive in 1918 was the last push to try and win the war before the American troops really began to arrive in big numbers, and to try also break the Royal Naval blockade, which was starving Germany. And it was a big push. The line buckled, it bent, but it didn't break. And Harry was part of that. And the Lincolnshires were thrown into massive casualties defending Arras. Unfortunately, he was killed. Another one with no known grave is on the enormous Arras Memorial to the Missing. I forget how many names is on that. I think it's 30,000. Jimmy Spears, a name that everybody all knows, it was associated with Bradford City. The captain and goal scorer in the FA Cup final in 1911. I think it's worth repeating what I said earlier. 100,000 people met the team when they arrived back in Bradford. That's a third of the entire population of Bradford on the streets to meet the team with the cup. Spears appeared on the balcony of the Midland Hotel, where we're going to go in a short while, and showed the cup to 100,000 people. 6 years later, he was shot through the leg at Passchendaele. It broke his femur. He was a dead man straight away, frankly. We found that. We met some Scottish doctors over there in France last time we were out, and they gave us an analysis. They said he was finished. His mates put him in a shell hole and said, look, we'll be back for you. But war being war, they went a different way. It was the Battle of Passchendaele, one of the worst battles of the war. So his body wasn't found until 1919. He's buried at Doshy Farm, which is about 2 miles outside Ypres. We visited that grave many times and left remembrance to the great man. And another really, really famous player, finally, Robert Torrance, man of the match in the 1911 FA Cup final. Probably the first ever time that award was given, because the FA, he was a centre half, brought into the replay, almost single-handedly nullified the Newcastle United attack, and the FA was so impressed by his performance they struck a medal to say, what a wonderful match he had. So we think it's, we can't find another reference to it. We think he's the first ever man of the match in an FA Cup final. Only ever played he's a Scotsman, but he only ever played professionally for City. He lived up at Wakefield Road, then he moved up to Undercliff. He was married with a small child, so he didn't have to join up, but he did. Well, he would have, when conscription came along, he would have done, obviously, but he joined up of his own accord. He was outside Ypres in 1918, the German Spring Offensive, again the same one that killed Harry Potter, but on a wide front. The West Riding Battalion were being pushed really hard, so Roberts, he was a gunner in the Royal Field Artillery. They went to support the West Riding Battalion. So he'll have been recognised by a lot of the lads in that battalion were Bradford lads. And you know, he's a First Division footballer, he's a well-known character. They'll have known who he was, they'll have been recognised, but there he was manning his gun. His gun position was shelled, he lost an arm, he was taken to a field hospital, that was shelled. You can only imagine the carnage that must have gone on there, and his body was never found. Another one. And his name's on the Tyne-Cop Memorial to the Missing, which is a mile away from Jimmy Spears. The two Cupmen are so close, yet so far. His name's amongst the 36,000 names on the Tyne-Cop Memorial to the Missing. So if you just for a second there, I've mentioned 50-odd thousand at Meningay, I've mentioned 72,000 at Teepval, I've mentioned 30-odd thousand at Arras, 30-odd, you know, so many men who had no known grave. He may lie in a grave that just says known unto God. He may still be under a field waiting to be found. So that's the story of the Bradford City sacrifice, if you like to call it that. And I'll pass you over to Steve now. Thank you.
Okay, William Jonas. Type his name into Google and you'll be amazed with this man. Centre forward for Clapton Orient, born in Blythe in Northumberland. He was recommended for a trial down at Orient by his best friend, Richard McFadden, who I'm going to talk about shortly. Schoolboy pals they were, grew up together. He was an ideal pairing with Richard. A great strike force they were for the Orient, who were deemed to go on to do great things in the Football League prior to the war breaking out. Not a bad looking chap, in fact, so much so he was the heartthrob of the ladies of Clapton, receiving up to 50 letters a week in those days. Yeah? And different to how footballers may be generally these days, he had to put an article in the programme saying, whilst I greatly appreciate all the kind regards being sent to me, would you please stop, because I'm happily married to my sweetheart Mary Jane. Yeah, William also was sent off for fighting, causing a full-scale riot at Millwall in an FA Cup match. Resulted in police and horseback having to safely guide the Orient supporters out of the old den. Okay, that was just before the start of the Great War. I think that's probably what he's going to be remembered for. But uncannily, the goalkeeper who he had to fight with was also fighting alongside him, side by side, in the Footballers' Battalion a year later. So it just shows you how things pan out in life, doesn't it, eh?
The next one's out of order, the next one's Scott.
Okay, George Scott, born in Sunderland. You're thinking, these lads are from the North East, what's going on here? Even in those days, a great scouting system. So Clapton Orient was going on to be a very big club prior to the war. George Scott, he was brought down to the O's, and he made 213 appearances for the club. He was generally a defender, although some reports have him as a forward. He scored the winning goal against Tottenham Hotspur at White Hart Lane in 1909, at Easter Monday. He wouldn't suffer falls gladly. He was wounded whilst fighting near at, where are we now, St Quentin, wounded and taken prisoner by the Germans, and was in a military hospital where sadly he died. There's reports that he was roughed up by his captors, but it may well have been he was fighting back to trying to give as good as he got. George will always be remembered for being a very loyal servant, and in some ways he's the forgotten man against the other two that I mentioned, William Jonas, Richard McFadden, because they were schoolmates and pals, you know. But George certainly was very much the heart and soul of the Orient side. And as for Richard McFadden, you put his name in, you won't be surprised, because I've already built him up already, this man. He was born in Cambuslang in Scotland, but moved to Blackburn initially as a toddler, and then went over to Blythe for his school years, and that's where he met his pal William Jonas. Richard McFadden, he was brought to the Orient, again spotted by their scouting system, down to London, and he soon proved to be a dynamic inside forward for the club. He was actually spotted by the Scottish international set-up, particularly after he scored for the Southern Football League against the England full side at Craven Cottage. And the reporter at the time got carried away, saying that surely he's going to play for England, thinking that he came from Blythe, but obviously Scottish by birth. Richard McFadden, he was awarded the military medal for his life-saving on the Somme, but way earlier than that, before he came to the Orient, it's reports that he dragged a man from a burning building, And then when he come down to the Orient on a training run one day down Lea Bridge Road, you know, East London by the River Lee, he spotted a young boy drowning, and without hesitation he jumped in and rescued him and pulled him to safety. And then a short while later, a few months later, he was walking across Clapton Park, which still exists to this day, and he heard a woman screaming, and he went across to her and she said, my baby is trapped in the room upstairs and the house is on fire, help me. And again, he went in there and rescued the baby, gave it to the woman, and casually walked off and then finished his excursion. He was a reluctant hero. When the Mayor of Hackney heard about these exploits, he had to be dragged in front of the Mayor to be presented with a medal for his bravery. He was also awarded a commission as a warrant officer, but sadly he was wounded by a shell whilst leading a line of troops along a trench in Serre, and he was taken to a field hospital, a tiny little hamlet called Couon, in the farm buildings, where it's hoping he's going to recover, but unfortunately he died the following day, and he's buried outside the farm buildings now in the cemetery at Couon, which is just to the north of Albert. Now, Richard McFadden was with his best mate William Jonas, trapped in Delville's Wood, and I mentioned William Jonas, and I'm coming on to it now, because William Jonas decided he couldn't stand it any longer being stuck in this trench with the terrible fighting and incessant battles and severe carnage at Delville Wood. I haven't got to tell you about that. You would all know about Delville Wood. Yeah, and William Jonas decided to make a run for it and have a last go before he cracked up mentally. He jumped up out of the trench and was shot, just like that. Bearing in mind these lads were schoolboys for over 20 years, Richard McFadden was moved to read a letter, which I'm going to read to you now. Sorry, write a letter back to the Orient. It says, I, Richard McFadden, sadly report the death of my friend and host colleague, William Jonas, on the morning of Thursday, the 27th of July, aged 26. Both Willie and I were trapped in a trench near the front in Somme, France. Willie turned to me and said, goodbye, Mac, best of luck, and special love to my sweetheart Mary Jane, and best regards to the lads at Orient. Before I could reply to him, he was up and over, and no sooner had he jumped up out of the trench, my best friend of nearly 20 years was killed before my eyes. Words cannot express my feelings at this time. Yours, Company Sergeant Major, Richard McFadden. This just shows you how much heart and spirit they had together, fighting shoulder to shoulder in that most stressful of moments.
Thank you. There are great gaps in my acquaintance now, and I find it difficult to swap reminiscences of boyhood. The men who were boys when I was a boy, the poet chants, but the men who were boys when I were a boy are dead. Indeed, they never even grew to be men. They were slaughtered in youth, and the parents of them have grown lonely. The girls they would have married have grown grey in spinsterhood, and the work they would have done has been undone. Several of us had arranged to meet with the secretary to see that original members of the battalion, to whom the price of the dinner was prohibitive, were provided with free tickets. But this, he told me, had not worked very well. And my old platoon confirmed this too, when asked about one or two men. They were so poor, these fellows, that they said they could not attend the dinner on account of their poor clothing. They should have known they would have been welcome in the sorriest rags, but their pride would not allow them to come. It was not a question of evening clothes. This dinner was largely for ordinary working men. I did not like to think then how bad their clothes, their whole circumstances were. It was not indeed a pleasant subject. They were with us, swinging along while the women and old men cheered in that early battalion of Kitchener's New Army. They were with us when kings, statesmen, general officers all reviewed us, when the crowds threw flowers, blessed us, cried over us, and then they stood in the mud and water, scrambled through the broken strands of barbed wire, saw the sky darken and the earth open with red-hot steel, and came back as official heroes and also as young, old workmen wanting to pick up their jobs and their ordinary life again. And now, in 1933, they could not even join us in a tavern because they had not a decent coat to their backs. We could drink to the tragedy of the dead, but we could only stare at one another in pitiful embarrassment over the tragic comedy of the living, who had fought for a world that did not want them, who had come back to exchange their uniforms for rags. And who shall restore to them the years that the locust hath taken? Ladies and gentlemen, it will take me a little time to unplug everything and power down. We are now, in fact, bang on 1 o'clock, so 5-10 minutes, and we'll be walking across to the War Memorial, and then Dave will be taking anyone who wants to follow him to the Midlands. So, ladies and gentlemen, well, my personal thanks to Dave and Steve, and I think it's been a worthwhile effort, and the collection box is still there.
It's all there. It's being filmed, I think, possibly. From my book, here we go, £14.99 plus £2.50.
Do it again.
They took the lead. I'm the author, Steve Jenkins, available from Clapton Orient on my home address. £14.99 plus £2.50 post and packing. It's a good read, thank you.
Be careful behind you. Dave's Paul, they've already told you that many of those days in January
Ladies and gentlemen, we're gathered here today to remember the service and sacrifice of the players of Clapton Orient, Bradford Park Avenue and Bradford City football clubs. I will read out the names of the Clapton Orient footballers. William Jonas, 27th of July, 1916, Somme. Richard McFadden, 23rd of October, 1916, Somme. George Scott, 16th of August, 1916, Somme.
And I'll now do the same for the Bradford City players. James Comrie, 9th of August 1916, Ypres. Jimmy Conlin, 23rd of June 1917, Newport. George Draycott, 18th of September 1918, Gorse Wood. Ernest Goodwin, 21st of July 1916, Etap. Gerald Kirk, 24th of April 1915, Saint Julien. Evelyn Lintop, 1st of July 1916, Somme. Harry Potter, 22nd of March 1918, Arras. Jimmy Spears, 20th of August 1917, Passchendaele. Robert Torrance, 24th of April 1918, Ypres. And we also remember the two Bradford Park Avenue players, Jimmy Smith and Donald Bell, VC.
Those of us left to remember should always remember those that are not here to share the wealth we have gained.
So just explaining that this is from the city of Hamm, which is the twin town of Bradford in Germany, and the this is supposed to represent a broken stadium, and then the names of all the 56 people who died in the fire are all over the memorial. And this is where every year at 11 o'clock on the 11th of May there's a service, and it's this season 2015 with 30 years, believe it or not, which you wonder sometimes where the time's got to, but so it'll be a big one this year. But anyway, we just wanted to stop and show you it. And,
Thank you.